Okay, hello everyone. Thanks for coming. Okay, so let's start at the start. Today, the title today is Setting Your Compass for Reading. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about why it's important to do extensive reading and some of the reasons behind that. Later this afternoon, I'll be introducing a reading program called Reading Oceans in the same room from 2 o'clock, where we'll talk a lot more about some of the products that Compass are doing. But this is not really primarily about Compass's products, but we'll look at some of them a little bit at the end. This is mainly about how and why we do extensive reading. So let's start with the big picture of the goals of language teaching. What do we do? What's our goals? What's our main aim as a language teacher? Okay? What are we trying to do? And I'd like you to talk to a friend and find out and answer that question. What's the main goal of language teaching? The answer is not teach English, okay? Ask a friend. What's the main goal of language teaching? Something you should focus on every single lesson, every single moment. Would you like to maybe talk together, make friends? Okay, do we have some ideas, please? Anybody would like to volunteer and answer? Yes, would you like to volunteer and answer? Thank you. All those people who don't want to volunteer, put your hands up.
They go, hey, volunteer, I volunteer. Yeah. Communication and understanding.
That's very important. I don't think that's a main goal, though. Not the main goal. I think there's something higher than that. Yeah?
Satisfy the student states that come to your class?
Yes, that's certainly, I think, right up there at very top. Any more? No? Okay. Well, my answer is, the goal of a teacher is to make yourself unemployed.
Yeah.
To lose your job. Yeah? That's really what we're aiming for. In any form of teaching, your aim is to take the students to a place where they don't need you anymore. Right? And by that I mean that we have to make sure the students are independent learners, that they can do things by themselves, that they don't need, hopefully, a dictionary, they don't need the classes. A lot of teaching that we do, a lot of activities and materials that we create tend to make students dependent on texts rather than independent. One of the key skills that students will need to do is to build up particularly their reading skill. And that, I think, is probably the cornerstone of a lot of things that students need to do. So let's look at some of the goals here. Ensure they can read, write, speak, and listen, of course, that's obvious. Build pragmatic, cultural, as well as linguistic knowledge. These are all good goals. Develop learning strategies, of course, we need to do. Develop independence. And that's really what I'm talking about. This ability for them to function without you. Yeah. And develop a sense of ownership of the language. This is quite key. And my experience, while it's not great and deep with the Korean population, and I certainly know a lot about the Japanese population, but from what I hear, there are many parallels where a lot of the students they're very highly motivated, or many students are very highly motivated to learn English for extrinsic reasons, for the reasons of tests, for the reasons of praise, reasons of status, a reason of being able to say I got into so-and-so school, from peer pressure, teacher pressure, and so on. But there aren't that many, as a percentage, who are really learning English for intrinsic reasons, because I really love English. They're doing it for reasons that, I want a good job, I want a good salary, I want good status, I want to please my parents, yeah, or don't want to embarrass my parents, and so on. And so, developing a sense of ownership of the language, believing it's part of you, not just something that is studied and practiced. And building a confidence with a can-do attitude. That is, they feel that when they pick up a book, they feel that they can actually do the reading rather than feel, oh my God, I can't do this, I'll try and struggle through. So what do learners need to know linguistically? Well, the grammatical systems, of course, that's obvious. From vocabulary perspective, about 2,000 everyday words occur in all types of English. We might call these general service words. But importantly, and I think this is something that many teachers don't quite understand and students don't quite understand, but there's an extremely important difference between two kinds of word knowledge, two broad kinds of word knowledge. There's a lot of confusion, leads to lots of trouble. The first is a word's form-meaning relationship. That is, how the meaning of a word is tied to its pronunciation, or it's tied to its spelling. So you would say how those two are connected, the meaning of something and its pronunciation or spelling. For a lot of people, a lot of course materials, a lot of teachers, that's where word learning stops. If you look at most course books and most things, they just teach the word and don't teach much beyond how to use the word so much. Students are just expected to pick it up somehow. The question is, how do they pick up this deeper aspect of knowledge, where a word has different meaning senses, for example, or different uses? Why we would say blonde hair, but we don't say blonde car. Right? So students need to know that. It's important for them to understand why we would say things in certain ways and not other ways, if they're going to sound even slightly native-like. They need to know the derivatives. So we don't just teach use, we've got to make sure they know useful or useless or disused or misused. Yes? These are all part of knowing a word. Whether a word's typically a spoken word or a written word is very important. A lot of materials that are published basically focus on the written word. Very little is focused on the spoken word. A lot of the language that students meet in course books is actually written language, but it's not spoken language. Students need to know if a word is rare or polite, or whether it's maybe a rude word. They need to know if the word is rare, because if it's rare, then I don't need to spend time learning it. And a lot of course books have lots of rare words which students simply don't need. We need to focus on the most important words. And they need to know what topic it is going to be found in, science, music, and so on, collocations and colligations. Now, everybody know collocation is okay? Who doesn't know collocation? Okay, all right. Okay, so collocations, colligations. All right, let's just quickly look at these. Now, you can see co here means together, of course, right? The location is place. So this is the example I gave before about blonde hair is an example of a collocation, how words go together. Yes? We say, for example, by and large, or not large and by. Yes? We salt and pepper rather than pepper and salt, typically. Yes? So collocations are the sort of the way that we put words together. Beautiful woman, not beautiful man. Yes? You can say beautiful man, but we tend not to. It's not like it's a rule, you can't, but it's just what we tend to say. Now, colligation is quite a bit different. It's a similar idea, but has the G here refers to grammar, word grammar. So this is why we say, like, depend on someone. Not just depend, but depend on. Give something to someone, not give something someone. Yes? This is what we call colligation. It's kind of like verb grammar, if you will. And colligation is one of the most undertaught elements of language. And I still see in many course books materials out there that teach a verb, but don't teach its colligation. They'll teach you, for example, give, but not give something to someone. Yes? Give something for a reason. Yes? So we need to make sure that students know how the prepositions and the verbs go together. Come on. Here we go. So why can't Korean students read, listen, speak, and write well? And I see this every time I come to Korea. When I go to Japan, I go to Thailand, and many, many places. A kind of test that I always have is I go and try and speak to some local people, particularly younger people. And I might go to a convenience store, and even if I speak the local language, I'll try and speak English. I want to see, what does an average young kid in this country know or doesn't know? This morning, I asked for a taxi from my hotel to come here. And I said, Sukmyung University. Yeah? To the guy. And he's like, eh. I said, university. You know, very as clear as I possibly can. Yeah? University. Sukmyung University. And I think it's Sukmyung-dae. Is that right? So I said, Sukmyung-dae. He goes, and several times I've been to the convenience store and asked for people simple things like, excuse me, where's the orange juice? And you go, huh? And so it's quite obvious to me that there are some Korean students who can speak English, and there's an awful lot who can't. Yes? And I'd find the same thing in Taiwan, in Thailand, in Vietnam. As recently I was in Mexico, and so on and so on. So it's not unique just to Korea. Go to Japan, you find the same thing. So a lot of the language knowledge that they have, unfortunately, is abstract. In a way, it's separated, discrete, because a lot of it's taught that way. So we teach the pieces of the language. And let me just explain to you how that works. So the basic idea here is that the sort of philosophy is that you've got a word or a piece of grammar which you teach. And you can think of it like a brick in a wall. You're building a wall. The idea is we're going to build a wall of English. Okay? And so what happens is you give them a piece of language. Let's say will. And then you add another one, say going to. And then you add, say, the difference between lend and borrow. Then you add another up here, and another one, and another one, and another one. And the idea here is that as we keep adding all these discrete, abstract pieces of language, the idea is you're building bricks, you're building the wall of English. And the basic idea behind that is when you've added all these things together, you'll then have English. And the analogy sounds quite a good one, except when there's an earthquake, a typhoon, or a wind. Because then, it's going to fall down. And the reason it falls down is nothing holding it together. The cement, the glue, that allows you to make connections between this and this, and that and this, and that and this, and these things here. There's nothing really that allows you to build the connections between languages and between elements of a language. So lots and lots of teaching of the pieces, the discrete, abstract, separate pieces of language is great. But we also need to connect it in meaningful ways. And we do that through extensive reading. So a lot of this knowledge is like bricks, which is very easy to fall down if there's a typhoon or something. So this is what I mean by too much work on the pieces of language and not enough comprehensible, meaningful input. Now, the advantage of this kind of approach here is that you give them a test on will and going to, and they'll get 100%. So they'll get 10 out of 10. But then you ask them, what's your plan tomorrow? Me go coex. Right? This is the kind of response you get. The same response you get somewhere else. Because they haven't quite got it internally. You give them a test on it, they can do it, but they can't say it. And the reason that they can't say it, primarily, is they haven't met the words in grammar enough times to feel comfortable using it. There's a certain threshold. When you meet something, a new piece of language for the first time, you can't use it immediately. Maybe some words you can, but a new piece of grammar, you can't use it immediately. You've got to get a feeling for it. Meet it a few times and learn, do we do this, and do we do that, and so on. It's not until you have enough knowledge of this, enough experience of that language form, that you're going to risk starting to use it. So what did you do? What are you doing tomorrow? Tomorrow I will coex, or I will going to coex. So you're trying. They're getting a bit better. Yes. So when they've got a bit more experience beyond that, a bit more sense of how the language works, how things fit together, then they'll start to produce. It's not until they've got that massive experience of understanding how this feels, have this sort of sense of how this thing works, not just know the rule, but actually the sense of how it works, then they can start to use it. The question is, where does that sense of language come from? And it comes from lots and lots and lots of exposure. They cannot speak until they feel comfortable using their knowledge, and one of the main problems is there's not enough exposure to language. To acquire a 7,000-word vocabulary requires them to meet about 10 to 15 million words. That's the mathematics behind this. And the reason, I'll explain the mathematics. If you take a large amount of text, the most frequent word in English is the. Now you read 17 words and then you see the. Read another 17 words and then you meet the. Another 17 words, you meet the. Statistically. Not in every sentence, but statistically. The second most frequent word is the be verb. Yes? Be, are, am, is. So if you read 20 words, you're going to meet the and the be verb. Another 20 words, you're going to meet the and the be verb. Now, if we extend that to the first 1,000 most frequent words in English, you have to read about 8,000 words before you meet all of them once, at least once. Okay? That's how frequent they come. If you want to meet, say, the 6,000th most frequent word in English, you have to meet somewhere around 120 to 150,000 words just to meet that 6,000th word one time. Okay? But of course, we don't learn words by meeting them one time. We have to meet them again and again and again. But if you're meeting that 6,000th word and 120,000 words to meet it, you have to wait another 120,000 words before it's going to come again. And another 120,000 words before it's going to come again. And if we know that for vocabulary learning it takes, say, 10, 15, 20, maybe 30 meetings of a word just to pick up its meaning and hold the meaning in your head, that's 20 times 120,000. You do the math. Okay? That's the mathematics of vocabulary. Some words appear more frequently than other ones. A typical Korean high school textbook series, 3-level course, has about 225,000 words. Not even close to this. Okay? If you add all of the Compass graded readers, Cambridge graded readers, Cengage graded readers, Penguin graded readers, you add them all up together, about 1,000 books, you're only up to about 4 million words. So, what we can see here is that there's still a long way to go. There's simply not enough input for students to meet language enough times to get used to it. Here we go. So what does a typical reading text look like for most Korean students? It looks like a compass book. Yes, like this. This is a very typical, very normal textbook. It's perfectly okay. There's nothing wrong with this book. It's actually quite a good book. But this is the kind of reading that the students will meet. So typically what happens here is that, you can't see, but it's got a short text. The text is short. Okay? Maybe 200, 300, 400 words. This is what they meet. I don't know why, but these things they were black. But anyway, you can't see them. Anyway, it does say many difficult words. Yes? There's some difficult words. So this word here is surgery, this is physical, and so on. Yes? And these words are there to be taught. The idea is to teach these words, and that's cool. That's what you want to do. That's the reason we're doing it, to teach the words. That's cool. The next thing is we have some exercises, reading comprehension exercises, vocabulary exercises, working on this. And down here, possibly we'll have some definitions. Now here they're in English, they may be in Korean, Japanese, French, Chinese, or whatever. And this is a typical reading text. It doesn't look just like yours, but I think most reading texts that students meet look something like this. Okay? So, how are they typically taught to read? From textbooks with short, difficult texts, doing lots of exercises to practice the grammar, vocabulary, reading strategies and skills. They all read the same material that was chosen by the teacher, or by the school, or by the school district. Oh, hang on, I'm going too fast. They all read at the same pace. I don't mean the same reading speed, I mean, all the students move to Unit 2 at exactly the same time. Yes? So if you're a fast reader, you sort of sit there going to sleep. If you're a slow reader, I haven't finished before we've moved on. Okay? They'll read at the same difficulty level because they all have the same book. Right? It doesn't matter whether you're a high-level student or a low-level student, everybody's doing the same stuff. And there's a good reason to, because we're trying to teach everybody something. But in any class, if you've got 30 students, there's going to be 10 or 15% who already find what you're doing easy. And 10 or 15% will never understand if you explain it for a million years. Yes? So you're trying to meet that sweet spot. But you've lost 10 or 15%, and you've lost 10 or 15% immediately, simply because of this type of approach. Okay? Now, it's a good thing to do, because you try and hit as many students as you possibly can. That's a good thing to do. There's nothing wrong with this. But we have to understand that we're not hitting everybody. Okay? So the text may or may not interest the students. Yes, may be interesting, maybe not. And it's hard to develop fluent eye movements for speed reading if you are constantly slowed down. So your eye is reading like this and then stop. And reading, stop. Stop. So it's hard for you to, a bit like driving. You're driving along the road, they've got the bumps in the road, yes? You can't drive quickly. And this is the same thing here. So we call this intensive reading. There are few chances for the teaching of discrete language points. I beg your pardon. It's good for teaching of discrete language points, yes? You can teach vocabulary, you can teach some grammar. It's a good thing to do. But there's few chances for the development of fluent eye movements, few chances to learn the patterns of the language, that is the grammatical systems, the collocations, the colligations, how things fit together. Why? Because they don't meet them very often. There's little allowance for the student interest, little allowance for reading at their own ability level, and often it's quite difficult for students to add new language to the existing store of language because the material is too difficult. You know, a Christian would say I+1, I+2, I+3, quite a bit higher than where they are. So there are some great benefits for this type of reading. Please continue to do this. But we need to add another form of reading to that as well. This is just an example here of typical Korean reading texts. They tend to teach the first 1,000 most frequent words in English quite well. They're pretty good at that. Yes? The second 1,000 most frequent word, unfortunately what happens is there tends to be quite a big change to a lot of low frequency, not so much useful vocabulary, and also many of the 2,000 most frequent words in English aren't met. And in a later presentation, another conference, I'm going to give you some actual data on that. This is the comparison between Japanese high school and Korean high school. This is what you get. Right? That's what you get for Japan, and that's what you get for Korea. Yes? Who do you think is going to do better in English? Typically, Koreans are outperforming Japanese. And you ask me why, and I say, that's the reason why. Yes? So why build reading speed? Well, first of all, natives read at 250 to 300 words a minute. Okay? Non-natives often read at less than 100. It's very hard to build up a sense of language and a high-level comprehension because students are often reading at the literal level. This is something I'm going to be talking about a bit later. If they can read faster, they'll be able to read more naturally, process the language more effectively and efficiently. They'll be able to understand more. They'll be able to remember more. Yes? They remember more because they're moving to a higher level of processing. Yes? They're now dealing with they don't have to think about the literal level of what's this word, what's this word, what's this word. They can move to a higher level of processing where they think in ideas and think in big pieces of language. And they can read more text. As we saw, reading more text, actually meeting more language, is a key element for the development of language. And they'll be able to finish tests faster. One of the reasons that students aren't particularly good at tests is they simply cannot finish them. They're not fast enough, so they have to guess the last points, particularly on TOEFL and TOEIC tests. The tests are long. They have to guess the last 15 questions because they simply can't get enough speed up to actually finish the test. So, how well does the course present the language the students need? Research suggests an average language course doesn't systematically recycle grammar forms outside the presentation unit and lesson. So what happens, I'll explain this in detail in a moment. There's an almost random vocabulary selection strategy, yes, without much regard to frequency or usefulness. And rarely, if ever, do books recycle words taught in Unit 1, rarely do those words taught appear again in Unit 3 or Unit 5. And they provide minimal additional practice in review units or workbooks, typically. Okay? So there's an overwhelming focus on new material. And let's look at that a bit more carefully. So, let's take, for example, a typical course book. This is Unit 1. I'm not saying a Compass course book, but any course book by any publisher. They all have the same basic design. Any course book has this design, typically. We have Unit 1, let's say we're starting with be verb, and we're doing simple adjectives. I'm hot, I'm cold, he's tired. Unit 2 has the simple present tense and maybe some daily routines. I wash my face, I get up at 6 o'clock, and so on. Unit 3 would have present continuous tense, which is sporting activities. I'm playing football. She's doing basketball, whatever. And then Unit 4 would be, say, can with some abilities. Unit 5 would be something different, and so on and so on and so on. So what you see from this is we have a linear strategy, a linear syllabus. The constant focus here is new. New, 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 new stuff. And the theory behind this is, because we've taught these adjectives and the be verb here, we don't need to recycle and meet them again. Why? Because they've learnt them. So now we can move on. We don't need to bring it back again. We don't need to teach it again. We don't need to bring these words back. Why? Because they've learnt them. Now we move on to Unit 2. That's the basic theory underlying this. Okay? So, what happens to things that we learn? Well, we know that we forget things over time unless they're recycled and memories are forgotten. So if I ask you, for example, what did you have for breakfast on Wednesday last week?
Same thing I have every day.
Okay, all right, fine. What was the name of your third-year junior high school science teacher? Do you remember? Okay, all right. So we forget things. It's perfectly natural. Okay, here's another experiment. All of you here are learning a foreign language, maybe English or Korean, for example, yes? What are 3 new words you've learned this week? Your face is like, huh? Right? We forget. It's natural to forget. It's not that you're stupid. It's not that your students are stupid. It's normal, natural to forget. We have to remember that we forget. And this is often something that we don't have in our classes. In fact, our brains are designed to forget stuff, not to remember stuff. We forget an awful lot more than we ever remember. So if you think about this in terms of time and knowledge, what happens over time is that knowledge will go like this. There's a very strong finding in research that shows that we will lose, particularly knowledge which is in pieces, like a word, a piece of grammar, a name. These will disappear over time. They will, unless we meet them again. And this finding is very, very strong. It's one of the strongest findings in psychology. We've known about this for 150 years. But we don't often fight the forgetting curve. So what happens here? If we've got our unit with all of these various things there, like this, what's going to happen to all of that? Well, this is going to happen to it. Yes, it's going to be lost. It will be lost. So let me just go back a sec. So what happens at the end here? So let's say you've got a student here. It's the end of semester test. They go back and look at their course book. It's like, there's a test tomorrow. I need to go and have a look. Let me look at Unit 1. It's like, I don't remember this. Did I do this? I don't know that. I don't remember this. So how do they feel? Well, they say, well, I've got a great teacher. We had a great time. I learned everything that she said. It was fantastic. The course book's fun. It's interesting. It's a compass book. It's fantastic. But I don't remember. So what's the problem? Must be me. I must be the idiot. I must be stupid. Because we met it and I don't remember, therefore I'm stupid. That's the natural outcome. With this design, we build in negative attitudes towards learning and negative self-impression, self-image. Without knowing it, one of the causes of low motivation, particularly at the end of first year middle school, you start with this great energy for learning English, and at the end you think, oh, it's so hard. It is, if we only teach students with this design. The natural outcome of teaching in a linear syllabus is that students will forget and they will feel foolish. And more likely it's like, okay, I don't like English. It's too difficult for me. I'll just do it for the test. Right? I don't do it for myself. So, what's extensive reading? This is quite different. Now, I want to make a very clear point. Before, I was talking about the course books and the design of the course books. Please, please, please understand. I love course books. I think they are great. Especially compass books, yes? They are really good. I have no problem with them. The problem I have is that they're not enough. You need the course book to teach stuff, but you need the depth of practice to deepen the knowledge you're meeting in the course books. You need two sides to the coin, not just one, which is more and more and more bricks. More bricks is fine, but we also need to make sure that that knowledge is deepened as well. So, let me go back a bit. So what's extensive reading? It's the fast, fluent reading of storybooks with higher levels of comprehension. Focus on comprehension and enjoyment, not study. And the aim is to deepen already met language, not new stuff. Stuff they've already met that they're starting to forget. That's the reason behind it. So the course book will teach stuff, then we give them the reading to practice it. Okay? Typically it's done with graded readers, level readers, storybooks, the kinds of things that you see here on the wall. Extensive reading and intensive reading work together. They're not in competition. There's no competition here. One is not better, one is not worse. They work together. But the absence of extensive reading means that the wall is likely to fall down. Okay? And it's likely to develop negative attitudes, negative self-image of their ability to learn in English. So they work together. So what are graded readers? They're storybooks written for learners of English at various difficulty levels. And this works the same way as you would when you're teaching children. Level 1 books have very, very few words, only the simplest grammar. Maybe just the present tense. Okay? Maybe there's only 80 words in the whole book. Level 2 would have slightly harder vocabulary, slightly higher grammar. Level 3 increases the difficulty, and so on and so on. So it's kind of stepped learning. And they progress through the levels reading books that mirror what they've learnt in the course books. So we can see that they would start down, the system would be like this, start on the left over here with maybe some phonics instruction, yes, so that they can actually read words, yes, and they can match the spelling with the sound. Then we'll work through books which have very easy grammar and very easy vocabulary. They master this, they get very good, their speed reading goes up, and then they get something more difficult, their reading speed goes down because it's a bit more difficult. And then eventually they move up, until they get to the more difficult vocabulary, and so on. So it's a kind of step from here, phonics material, all the way through as we step up to more and more and more difficult texts. The aim here is to get to native texts, Dan Brown and your Harry Potter. That's where we end up. So in order to get there, we don't start here. Yeah? We don't start with native materials. We start with something which is slowly, gradually going to build their knowledge to be able to build up to read that material. So in a sense, you could think of this reading is actually temporary reading. We do that in order to get there eventually. Now, if you're teaching a child to learn in your first language, you don't start with Tolstoy. You don't start with Jane Eyre with a 5-year-old. Yes? You start with something very easy. Lots of pictures, very easy words. Yes? And it's exactly the same system applied for language learners. The big difference between the two is that first language materials are written for first language students. Yes? And they're not always the right materials to put in front of second language learners. The big difference is when you start learning in a first language, when you start reading in Korean, when you start reading in, say, English or French or whatever, you start at the age of 4 or 5. You already know several thousand words. The big difference with second language learners is they don't know the 1,000 words and they don't know the grammar. So some of those first language materials are great at the lowest level, but very quickly they get too difficult. So you have to be quite careful and make sure that if you're going to be introducing some of the native materials in, that they are at the right kinds of levels for the students. So they work together, as I said. You've got the course book doing this, and you've got the extensive reading, the graded reading, consolidating, strengthening, deepening the knowledge. Features of extensive reading. Well, there are many, many different kinds of extensive reading, but typically, this is how it would work. All the students would read different books. So with an online system like this one, all the students can read something different. Yeah? Student will choose rather than the teacher. Wide variety of materials, fiction, non-fiction, maybe not for young kids, but you've got maybe romance, action, dramas, thrillers, and so on. The texts are longer. We saw before the intensive texts tend to have very short text, 200-300 words. They tend to be much longer, sometimes several thousand words in the readers. Very few difficult words, yes? And the reason for that is if you have lots of difficult words, they're speed reading bumps. And it's going to slow them down. So students should find something that's easy. They should be reading at their fluent reading level. A lot of this reading will be done out of class. On the computer, at home, take a book, take it home, bring it back to the next class. It doesn't have to take much class time. The emphasis here is on the skill of reading. And you can make the comparison with your students about the difference between driving lessons, intensive reading, and driving on the road. Actually negotiating the language. Learning where you need to be on the road. Where do I need to be to turn right and left? No, watch out for the dog. Yes, and so on and so on. The skill of driving you get by driving. You can learn how to drive, the mechanics of moving the car, in lessons. It's the same with reading. You can learn how to read in a reading class, but then you need to practice the skill. It's exactly the same with piano lessons, playing a piece of music, creating a piece of music yourself. Baseball practice, and actually playing the game. And this is something that students can easily get. Yes? The reading's in the second language, no Korean needed, because it's quite easy. Lots of new words. New words are often met in later chapters, so the words come again and again and again. Why? Because there's so much language in the text. There's an emphasis on reading for comprehension and enjoyment, and provides input for speaking and writing. I'm just going to check my time here. I think I have 10 minutes left. Come on. Okay, so let's move on. But when students are reading extensively, it's absolutely crucial that they read at the right level. And the way to do that is they read something quickly and enjoyably with adequate comprehension so they don't need a dictionary. R-E-A-D. Yeah? Very important. If they're reading extensively, if their idea is to read to get speed, for enjoyment, to be able to practice the skill of reading, they have to read like this. If they're reading something too slowly, then it's not going to build up their knowledge. If they read enjoyably, they're going to enjoy it and read more. If it's not enjoyable, they're going to get bored, they're going to put it down. If they don't understand what they're reading, it's not helpful for their comprehension. And they don't need a dictionary, meaning not too many speed reading bumps, so they can build their reading speed, fluency. And they can forget actually that they're reading. They're just enjoying the story in a kind of flow. So those four conditions are really important. So if they need a dictionary, it's too hard, they'll stop, slow down. Their aim is fluency and speed, not to learn the new language when you're doing extensive reading. Intensive reading is learning new language. Fine, good, continue doing that. Extensive reading is practicing old stuff to get better at it. Yes? Typically students read at home. It doesn't take much class time for huge benefits. There's a lot of research that shows that students who do only the intensive test-type practice compared to the students who do extensive reading, the ones who do extensive reading outperform, do better on tests than those students who do test preparation. There's a lot of research on this now. For many people, that's kind of counterintuitive. It doesn't feel right. Huh? How does that work? If I study for a test, I'm going to get better on the test, right? No, not necessarily. Why? Because of the brick analogy. More and more pieces doesn't make a better language. What students need on a test is to be able to see the language as a whole, to comprehend the whole piece of the language, not the pieces of the language. Yes? If the test is about pieces of language, they'll probably do better on the test. But if the test is for comprehension, like say like a TOEIC test or a TOEFL test, they don't have grammar questions on there. They don't have vocabulary questions on there. Yes? Not in any meaningful sense. So students will do better on tests because they understand the whole of the language better than the pieces of the language. There's a lot of research on that. So we should add this reading to our program. We don't replace it. So how do they fit together? Well, I want to explain to you how these two fit together. If we start off here with like low-level comprehension, low reading speed, and low vocabulary, there are three critical numbers that you need to understand. The first is 90%. If you've got a text, it doesn't matter if it's a low-level text, a high-level text, doesn't matter, okay? If you've got a text and you know only 90% of the words, or less, that means there are maybe 10% of the words you don't know. We call that reading pain. Yes? It's hard, poor comprehension, high effort, demotivating. But if we've got a text which is between 90 to 98% of the words you do know, 8%, 5% you don't know, we can call this an instructional level, intensive reading. This is good for study. You can study from this. Not too hard, there's so many words it demotivates you. But it's at the right kind of level where you understand enough, but there's a few words you don't know that will help you work forward. But it's going to be slow, and it's a form of study, not a form of practice. If students know something over 98%, that is 2% or 1% of the words they don't know, 1 or 2 words per page, then they can read extensively. Fast, fluent, adequate comprehension, and enjoyable. And this here is the sweet spot for extensive reading. This kind of range here. Relatively few words they don't know. Almost no words they don't know. They don't need the dictionary. They're able to read quickly, fluently, and so on. Build up their knowledge. And learn how the language fits together. Build up a sense of how the language fits together. So if they already know 100% of the words, then we could say it's speed reading practice time. They can actually practice their speed, build my speed. 80 words a minute to 90 words a minute to 120 words a minute. Okay? So there's 4 levels of reading here. And as I say, it doesn't matter if this is a low-level book or a high-level book, it's the same basic idea. Yes? If it's too difficult, it's going to be demotivating. And all the way up, you need to find that sweet spot they can read it. Now, how do we know what their reading level is? You have to ask them. You can't decide. You can't say, this is good for you, because you don't know what's inside his head. You don't know how he feels about whether something is readable or not readable. Yes? So that's how they fit together. So, if they're reading at the right level, they read faster, they read more, they understand better, they enjoy reading, therefore they read faster. That's the cycle of learning that we want to have happen, as much as we possibly can. So in the fluent reading class, reading pain does not equal reading gain. Okay? Choose reading with soul. What you need to do is choose reading materials where they can read quickly. There's a wide variety of books out there. There's a wide variety of difficulty levels, because everybody's at a different difficulty level. You can have 2 sisters, twin sisters, both 14 years old, look at the same book, and one student's going to say, this is too difficult for me. And the other one would say, I want to give it a try. They've had exactly the same class, exactly the same teacher, 2 different attitudes to the same text. Yes? So don't assume that all your 13-year-old students are exactly the same in level. No, they're not. They're not the same in attitude either. Most of their time should be spent reading as much as they possibly can. In reading class, let them read. Give them the reading for outside. Not translating or answering questions, doing reports and so on. The reading should be pleasurable as much as possible. And should be motivating and inspiring. So reading here is more than just language practice. So this analogy here of reading is reading pain is not true. Okay? Please make sure of that. So a summary of extensive reading. Massive language practice at the student's level of understanding. Excellent chances for the development of fluent eye movements because they're reading quickly. They can move their eye quickly because they're reading quickly. Excellent chance to learn the patterns in the language because the student is reading a lot. They're able to make these connections between the bricks. They know the difference between blonde hair and yellow car. And you say, well, why don't we say blonde car? Don't know. Why do we say blonde hair? Don't know, but it feels right. Yeah, beautiful woman feels right. Beautiful man? Oh, that doesn't feel right. Handsome woman? And this sense of language is something they pick up. You can't teach it. There's no book, no dictionary will tell you that we say beautiful woman, we don't say handsome woman. The only way that they know this sense of what feels right, this sense of collocation, sense of colligation, comes from exposure. Why do you know? Well, I just do, right? And that sense of knowledge is something they have to pick up. We cannot teach it. They have to learn it. So there's a high probability the student's going to be interested in what they read and become a more confident reader. Okay? Here we go. So this is an example of some of the reading material that Compass has. Young Learner Reader Classics. I'm just going to go through this quickly. I'm sure there are other sessions for you to come and have a look at these things. So Young Learner Classics, 60 classics, very, very good material. This is an example of some material which is great for kids. This is a typical reading text here. You see it's longer, no dictionaries, no glossary, no comprehension questions there, just read. I think you say, dokso, yes, just read. Yeah? And for Compass Classic readers, it's extensive reading practice, and it builds up this fundamental reading fluency, and so on. And they're all part of this Reading Ocean series. Here are some more information about Compass Classic readers. They've got graded stories, appropriate vocabulary, motivating stories, short playlets, glossaries, and audio as well. And this is an example of some of the stories from the classics. And this is how they all fit together. You can find this all information in the Compass brochures. And please take a look. And Reading Oceans, this is the new series which I'll be talking about in this room in 2 hours' time. It's a new online series. 600 graded readers. Please come and have a look. There's a lot of good stuff there. And this is the sort of what it looks like, and I'll leave it there. If you want the slides from this PowerPoint presentation, I'm going to write my web page here for you. You can download this PowerPoint from my website. Feel free. I uploaded it last night, and if you want it, please take it, play with it, use it, abuse it, show it to friends, do what you want with it. I don't care. But try and spread the word as much as you can about the importance here of extensive reading and about why it's important that students continue to learn new stuff through their typical course books, but they also deepen that knowledge through lots and lots and lots of practice. Remember, they need lots of exposure because of the way that the language works. You need to, as your level goes up, you need to read more and more and more. So typically, students would need to read about 1 book a week at the very lowest level. But when you get to the elementary, intermediate level, it needs to be 2 books a week. Why? Because most of the language they already know. There's a lot of language that they don't know. Yes? And it takes longer to meet words they don't know. When you get to the advanced level, it takes even longer to find something you don't know. Therefore, the amount of reading has to increase. It goes like this. Right? Which is why it's easy to get a good level of English and very hard to get a high level of English. Okay? So please make sure that your students are both doing the intensive course book material, but also bring in the extensive reading material. If you don't have time so much in your classes, you could maybe ask them to do an online reading series, something like this, which will really help them. Thank you for your time.